Good morning, and I want to just say how incredibly honored I am to be here, how welcome everyone in New Zealand has made me feel. It's my first time here, and a special thank you to NDF for having the wisdom to bring a museum educator to your midst. And in fact, I think that was one of the first things Matthew said to me. He's like, well, we've never had an educator as a keynote, so we thought it was about time. And I'm so glad that you selected me, and I hope that in the next so many minutes you will all feel that it was worth your while and worth the efforts on the part of not only NDF but Te Papa, who's been so welcoming, and I have more work to do with them, which I'm very much looking forward to. And, you know, here we go. I did, just a few off-script notes, I did question the wisdom of showing you a very dark slide with someone sleeping at 9 in the morning, but I'm going to trust that I'll keep you awake. So I was encouraged by two of your colleagues who came to New York to make sure I was really the right choice. That would be Courtney and Virginia. To start with something personal, to share my background with you, and I'm always happy to do that, also because it's instructive to how I look at the world. My first job straight out of college was at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, which wasn't even a museum when I knocked on their door and said I would do anything for free, whatever it is. And they were thinking about creating a world-class museum in a former police warehouse a warehouse for police cars. And they had hired this somewhat unknown architect named Frank Gehry to figure out a way to make this warehouse into a museum. And so, needless to say, it was a very interesting time, and as these things go, when you're in a small museum like that, there were a dozen of us trying to make this thing work. You learn a lot about what you do want to do in a museum and what you don't want to do. And I knew from that experience I didn't want to raise money, I didn't want to be a curator, I didn't want to write grants, I didn't want to be a librarian, but what I did find interesting is that the director didn't have any interest in education at all. So here were coming these fantastic works of art from all over the world for the first time in Los Angeles, which had never had a dedicated contemporary art space before, and people were coming in and overwhelmed with the experience, no idea what to do with that experience. And so I left MOCA and I went to grad school to get my degree in education, and ended up as an intern at the Art Institute of Chicago, where I learned how to be a lecturer. And what an amazing collection. And I don't know if this game was very popular in New Zealand, but when I was little, we used to play a board game called Masterpiece. Did anyone have a Masterpiece game? It was, you had somebody over there, you had postcards of all these artworks. Well, did you know that those artworks all came from this museum? No, you didn't. But I did, because when I would show up for the 12 o'clock tour, my audience would have the cards with them and say, show me this picture. And if I gave a public tour that didn't include Grant Wood's American Gothic or didn't include Edward Hopper's Nighthawks, they would say to me at the end of the tour, I didn't see the museum. But it also, it was a very good lesson in the power of an image, and it was, sorry to be dating myself, but whatever. This was a moment when there was something called Microsoft that invented this organization called Interactive Home Systems, where Bill Gates thought he would display images on his palatial residence on the wall, and he called up the Art Institute and said, well, can you send over some files? You know, I need some digitized files. And we're like, digitized files? What is that? And he's like, well, yeah, you know, pictures of you. I'll digitize them. Just send the pictures over. And we're like, no, like, you know, we're not going to send you our pictures. And so that was the beginning of integrating technology into my art experience. I was the youngest lecturer. I was the only one that knew how to use a Mac computer, which, by the way, was black and white screen and had no images on it, but we'll get to that. And so just by stupid luck, I was the one, it's almost like you're in the lineup and everybody steps back and you're left. I was the one who took on a lot of these technology projects. We made video desks. How many of you have actually touched a video desk? Oh, not too many, okay. And then when I left the Art Institute, we were actually in the age of CD-ROM, and a few years out of the museum world, back in when the web was on the horizon. And in '96, the Metropolitan Museum of Art asked me to come and figure out what an educational website might be. This is 1996, and when I got the call, I was like, oh, that's interesting. www.metmuseum.org. Sorry, I don't have a picture of it. I didn't have the time to look in the graveyard, but literally, you opened up the page. There was a very bad photo of the museum with a big yellow taxi in front of it. And there was a little type-in box below, and it said, welcome to the Metropolitan Museum. Enter your email address here. And I called up, I said, I don't think you want me, like, this isn't really a place that is interested in education. You're locking the front door of your website. And well, anyway, they took that down, and instead, over a number of years, we developed what I think a tool I'm still very, very proud of, even though I don't work there anymore, which is called the Timeline of Art History. And it was a very big success on a number of different fronts, many related to the kinds of subjects that you're talking about yesterday, and I'm sure today, which have to do with how do you make a collection database interesting for people who have no expert knowledge. And the director had a big hand in this, Philippe de Montebello, who's now retired, but he said, I don't care what you make, I don't use the web, this is '98, but it has to be visual, it has to be beautiful. Whatever you do, art has to take a prime place. And I was interested in Peter's talk yesterday because it sounded like the same director was in his museum at the same time with the same idea. I oversaw a team of 25 professionals of different kinds of media production. It's a little unusual for a large team like that to be in the education department, but it meant that we could build a lot of crosswalks along what we were doing in print and on the web and in a video format, and CD-ROMs we made galore at the time. And we began to understand the fluidity of the data, that it was important to keep the data in ways that allowed us to use it however we wanted to use it. And towards the end of my 13 years at the Met, we we were asked to organize a project that was enormous in scope. It was an enormous 35,000 square foot education center, which all of us were determined to make state-of-the-art technology. And it meant a lot of things, but primarily that we wanted to instigate a digital signage system. So that fluidity of data really came into handy when we were building that space. You can see at the bottom of the left, there's like a little mention of the education space. What is it about education spaces always being in the basement? I don't know. So the rest of my talk is really in sort of 3 phases. I think they'll be easy to detect. I'm going to talk to you about the latest thinking in pedagogy in terms of how we learn and what kinds of materials and what kinds of learning styles are really prevalent these days. I think that might be a new subject for you. I'm not going to be very detailed about it. And then I want to sort of match that up with the tools that are available today to all of us as educators, and how the combination of those tools have this really magical connection with the objectives, if you're a teacher, what you want to get across. And then just so I don't fall down on my duty of being a flag waver for the Museum of Modern Art, I'm going to bring in the examples of what we've done over the last couple years so that the examples are concrete in your mind. I just want to say quickly that I'm using MOMA because it's extremely convenient for me, and I'm completely aware by attending the sessions yesterday and doing a little research on my own that many of you have as good, if not better, examples of these things. So please don't think that I'm presenting these MOMA case studies as the perfect, archetypal, everyone should do it like we are. That's not at all the case. So I want to start with the brain, because that's a very important part of your body that you learn with. And I'm very interested in neuroscience, although I have absolutely no skills or background in it. The things I take away from what I've read lately interest me, and because they're also very relevant to my own life. So it turns out that we actually now can map how a memory is made. Did everybody know that? Like they actually know the chemical processes of how a memory is laid down in your brain. And I mean, what could be more basic than that as an educator to understand that? And of course, I'm horribly simplifying the process just to, you know, make this talk go quicker. But basically, there's two things that optimize the transition of an occurrence of an impulse from short-term to long-term memory. And one thing is that if that little new piece of information, that little impulse, can be related to something else that's already laid down in the brain, boom, goes to long-term memory. The other thing is if when that impulse happened, that new little piece of information, happens at the same time as something very surprising or unusual or something that the brain has never experienced before, also long-term memory. So how does that, you know, let's just check on that for a second. So how many of you walked into a store and had a smell that was a very unusual smell, and all of a sudden your memory goes back to when you were a small child, right? And you might have smelled like your first hot chocolate, let's say, or something like that. That kind of memory, it's a smell that relates to something that's already laid down in your brain. And I also always wondered why it was that when I think about my childhood, the memories that come out the most vivid in my mind are the ones where my mother was an avid traveler and she took us to all sorts of exotic places, places you would never drag a 6-year-old, honestly. Africa, Japan, all sorts of places. And I can remember every day of our travels, but I can't remember a single day of my 12 years in grade school. And it turns out that, you know, coming back to our subject here, it turns out that classrooms are a pretty bad place to learn. I mean, for no other reason, not speaking about the teacher, but these very monotonous, consistently organized, not very varied environments are actually not great places to remember things. So here's my my mentor in ways, although we've never met. He did found my graduate school, who's talking here in this quote about the fact that you learn your whole lifetime. It's not that you go to school and then you never learn again after you graduate, that your whole lifetime is learning. And the other thing that he's known to sort of coining and bringing into our practice, which in museum space we use all the time, which is learning by doing. And I think that that is actually something that's very relevant when we talk about teaching online, and I'll get to more examples of that later. And a more recent iteration of this kind of thinking is found in the works by this gentleman, Howard Gardner, who promotes a theory of multiple intelligences, which means that each of us have a great number, perhaps a great number, or maybe just one intelligence that may not be exactly wired the same way as the person next to you. So some of you might prefer to learn while you're listening to music. And some of you might prefer to learn by talking with each other. And some of you are exceptionally good at knowing yourself, knowing all things about yourself, which is the intrapersonal skill. And you can see from the list on the left, there are 8 different qualities that he's identified as multiple intelligences. And it turns out that when you look at that in a regular classroom, even right now, I'm sorry to say, that we really don't engage that thinking enough, and especially not in a K-12 classroom where, typically speaking, the teacher is at the front speaking to the children aligned in rows, and they're only getting information from one direction. And then at home, they're reading things, and maybe they're great readers, maybe they love to read, but maybe they're not. So it turns out, of course, that museums are incredibly social spaces. So the people with multiple intelligences that favor social experiences are great. But it turns out that it's not just even an intelligence necessarily, but it's actually quite common for people to love to learn in social groups. And that, you know, it fuels a lot of kinds of behavior that we all recognize, people taking classes after school or getting together in book clubs, that kind of thing. It's the thing that we, in museum education, we talk a lot about is inquiry-based learning. So the best kinds of guides in education are the ones who aren't standing up here, actually like me, spouting all this high-level knowledge to you that the sponges over there who are just absorbing it, but that I'm leading a discussion with you about, well, what do you think about that? And what makes you say that? What did you see in the painting that makes you say that? Phrases like that help the group to become more of a social learning group and end up actually being a very satisfactory experience, in most cases, when done well. You can imagine with contemporary art, this slide is taken from MOMA, that it's even more important because the kind of art you're looking at often is not realistic, often doesn't relate to something that's already implanted in your brain, and you need someone like me to kind of make the connection or get you thinking in a different space, feeling comfortable with your feelings so that you can unleash your thoughts about it and share them with others, or hear the thoughts of others and realize, oh God, she thinks exactly what I think. That's interesting. Peer-to-peer learning is a really important part of that. And I'll talk about the audio guide later, but it guided our thinking and what kinds of facilities we could build into the technology that we're introducing into the gallery, things that bolster behaviors that are already there. And what I just want to introduce this idea to you of the flipped classroom. I was kind of bugging Matthew because I knew he had children. Like, have you heard about the flipped classroom? Does that happen in New Zealand? It's a big subject in the U.S. and it's actually one of the things that I think is going to really a huge disruptor for the K through 12 space in the U.S. And essentially, I'll just explain it really quickly, which is that the flip means that what you would normally do inside the school, let's say 9 to 3, would happen at night when you were doing homework. So in other words, the content ingestion happens at home where you're reading a book or watching a video or reading resources online that your teacher directs you to. And what's the advantage of that? Well, you could repeat things over if you didn't understand them. You can go at your own pace. You can learn them when you're ready to learn. What happens in the classroom during the day is what we would typically assign as homework. In other words, problem sets, or write 5 answers to this, or whatever else, and usually organized as a group. So, hey, you 5, go over there, figure out this problem based on the information that you learned last night. And me, the teacher, I'm going to circulate the room and find out who did their homework and who's got the good questions, and I can actually see the application of the knowledge. So that's a very brief overview of the flipped classroom concept. And what I like about it is that it really takes advantage of what we know about retention rates. So if you've never seen this pyramid before, when I first looked at it, I thought it was the food pyramid. Did New Zealand have a food pyramid back in like 20 years ago? We had it in the US. There was a food pyramid. It was abysmally wrong, and they recalled it in like the last 5 years. But basically, I'm sorry to say that because here I am lecturing to you, but the very top of the pyramid with the least amount of percent average student retention rate is lecturing. Next is reading, and it goes all the way down to 90% retention. If you can teach the material to somebody else, 90% retention rate. Sorry, hold on. So, you know what? Maria Montessori knew that. And that's why she mixed up the kids in the grades all together in one grade, different ages, and they became mentors for each other, and that's where the peer-to-peer learning is so strong. So we check out pretty well on these scores, to be honest. GLAMs, we're fact warehouses. We can deliver that content to the student at home in the flipped classroom, no problem. When you come to our museum, we are very good at learning by doing. We support multiple intelligences, most of us. We have a very wide range of ways that we teach you in the galleries. And like I said before, we're really trying to support peer-to-peer learning. And the whole immersion of coming into a museum is like being in a new space. It's like traveling to a different country. Your mind is going to be exceptionally open to storing new memories when you walk into a museum. This is an exhibit that I experienced yesterday in Te Papa, and I thought, this is fantastic. Te Papa obviously does not need to listen to this lecture so far, because they've already set up this incredible environment that is inviting and visually interesting. It's immersive, and you can touch 4 things in the room that are from 4 different parts of New Zealand, and there's just a little text to give you a little context around that. I will never, ever forget that experience that I had yesterday. So we're in the second phase now, and I hear some of you laughing at this picture. Let me tell you, this is my favorite picture to keep up here more than anything else, because this is actually an installation from a sound artist, and each of the objects that you can't see in the room are wired back to his computer, and he plays the objects like an orchestra. But when I looked at this installation, I said, this is what every curator thinks when I start the conversation in the meeting saying, I have an idea of putting some technology in the galleries. What do you think, right? This is what they think I'm going to say. But it's also just helpful to understand that, you know, the digital platforms that we have today are not always as clear as they could be, and not always as useful as they could be, although they are proliferating. And what I wanted to show you with this slide is really, it's really just to talk about the fact that, I've heard all of you say this, so this is not going to be news to you, but that we have to get beyond databases of content, however beautifully standard-studded, API-laced they are. Because for the, and I'm speaking now especially for the K through 12 space, but for the average teacher and student and parent and everyone else who wants to help the kid have as rich a school experience as possible, we don't have that specialized language to pull out the data that we need. And so this is a tray of butterflies that I was lucky enough to be back in the collection area at the Smithsonian recently, and they were preparing them to be digitized, and I was having this conversation about, well, what kind of metadata are you going to associate with these butterflies? And they're like, well, Lepidoptera, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, what about metamorphosis? And they're like, and I said, well, what about migration? No interest. And so what it means is that you and I and everyone else are going to have to work really hard to back convert that content into concepts, into stories that teachers and students and parents are actually going to look for. This is the collection page of the Museum of Modern Art's website, and we're no better, because let's just say I'm a teacher that there's a lot of conversation about World War I going on, and for good reasons. Let's just say I want to teach about World War I, and I want to teach about what city life was like after World War I, just give a sense of the devastation and the social unrest that happened after the end of that war. I know in my mind that I've seen pictures from artists and photographers that documented this. I don't know their name, I don't know anything else, but I know I was at MOMA, I saw them, I'm coming to the collection page, boom. There's nothing there that's going to help me. And I'm typing in World War I, I'm typing in city, and I'm getting either nothing or so many things. You know, you've been there. I don't have to go on. So in order to stopgap this measure, and it really is a stopgap, I don't think this is an ultimate destination for us as GLAMs, we've created a site for teachers. And you probably all have versions of what you offer for teachers too. And in our site for teachers, as you see, MOMA Learning, it launched about 2 years ago, I want to say. We've already welcomed teachers in a completely different way. There's a video that helps you understand what is in this resource right off the bat on the top left side. We tell you we have tools and tips, we have latest information from the blog, and we tell you right up front, what is modern art? Like, we don't expect you to know anything about modern art, and if you don't, you click on here and we'll help you a little bit. And if you go to search, you might even come up with this. I put in city, and this is what I got. Expressionism in city life. Oh, expressionism, that's what I meant. Oh, Kirchner, that's the artist. Here's the picture. I'm helping the teacher in ways to make them feel like, okay, this is a resource that I can come back to. And that's our goal. Now, there has been some conversation about Google Art Project, and I just wanted to point out a couple things. One is that I think it's really important for us as GLAMs to go outside our walls. I think that going beyond the database is not just a language, content theme issue. It's also understanding where our audiences are and how to position ourselves there. And for that reason, that we are also members of the Google Art Project. But frankly, I'm going to have that same frustration that I just had at MOMA.org at the Google Art Project. I don't think I'll always have that frustration. I think that there will be tools probably faster than on my site on the Google Art Project. I'm just saying that it's great that we're putting our images out there, but specialists are very happy who needed to know where all the Monets are in the world. But for most people who we want to help, the people that come into our places on foot and ask really important questions to them, I'm not so sure it's helping them at the moment. Something that is helping them, though, are these incredible encyclopedias. And I just discovered this one. I love this encyclopedia. And if I were you and you wanted to connect with teachers, I would ask Matthew to put all of your content connected here somewhere. These kinds of aggregate sites that are built around stories. Perfect. I understand what a story is. And I can look through that list of stories and see if there's something that links to me as a teacher. That is a very direct, very useful way. And I'm sure that from those stories, it'll branch into all sorts of other content as well. Something like that we just joined that I wanted to bring to your attention if you weren't already aware of it is the Khan Academy. How many of you know about Khan Academy? Oh, pretty good number. Okay. So recently they invited a small number, but I think it will be a larger number, of institutions to join with them in putting up content. And for us, that meant what they really wanted, because Khan Academy is geared for K through 12. They started in the STEM space, science and math. They've created enormous and very high quality resources on learning math, learning science, learning other kinds of things related to STEM. And they're just now dragging into the what I call the STEAM area, the arts, the humanities, and other kinds of subjects that, they don't get packaged so neatly as it is to learn geometry or something, which is step by step. So when they said that, we have so many wonderful videos on our website at MOMA.org, can't we share them? We said, okay, but here's the deal. You can use our YouTube embed code, but we can't, for lots of reasons, copyright reasons, and also for reasons of updating and control, we can't give you the videos to upload on your website. They said, that's fine, that's what we'll do. So federating those video embeds, I think, is a really good way of spreading your content around to places that are receptive to the audiences that you want to target. We also do a lot of blogging. I'm just doing a little time check here. Okay. We also do extensive blogging on our MOMA.org website, but in a similar, and I think those things are important to do because they add the stories to the content. So basically, it gives the language, the narrative language, to our visitors. And again, thinking about multiple intelligences, this is a blog that was made about the conservation of a Nam June Paik video sculpture. It has a lot of science, because it was a conservator that wrote it, and it's accompanied by some videos showing the processes. It's very attractive for people who are thinking about science and technology and conservation of media materials, all of which are hot topics. And so we try in our blog to triangulate, or even more points on the shape than a triangle, to think about all the different kinds of reasons why people would want to look into our data. And because it doesn't fall neatly into data fields, we go to places like a blog or something else that is made to have narrative in it. And again, as much as we love our blog on MOMA.org, we also love Tumblr. Tumblr is a really interesting community. How many of you know about Tumblr? Oh my gosh, okay, forget it. So I just want to say that as a museum that focuses on the visual, it's a great space for us because Tumblr is primarily visual, and the Auckland Zoo already knew that. They don't even have any words on their Tumblr site. It's all images. So think about that. Think about the nature of your collection and where are the audiences that are looking for that kind of visual material. Now, here's a little, this is like the bonus question. So all of us are really good at thinking about things in We don't call it cyberspace anymore, do we? Like web space, cloud space. These are all great ways to connect new and your existing audiences with what you do. Are there any things you can do inside when they're in the museum to connect them? And the answer is yes. We just unveiled over the summer, kind of a soft launch, this new Audio Plus system for our audio guides. So gone are the audio-only recorded stick wands that we distribute. Very popular, by the way. We give out 2,000 a day for free, and we have a 60% uptake in the museum, which I don't think anyone else has anywhere. And I think there are two factors driving that interest in the wands, to be perfectly honest. One is that we're modern and contemporary art and people feel like they need some help. And the second is that it's translated into, I think, 10 languages. And so because 60% of our visitors are international, it's a primary source for them to find their way around the museum and get good interpretive content. But when we were thinking about the new version of this, we wanted to conflate the very successful MOMA app that we have, which, by the way, had all of the audio content on it already, and the fact that we might need to introduce some new and perhaps more interesting things to do with a digital device that you have with you when you're walking around the museum. So we had this idea that, well, hell, if we're going to use the iPod Touch, maybe we should let them use the camera. Now, MOMA already has a very generous photography policy. With the exception of certain special exhibitions, everything else is photographable. And so what we'd put in here was an interface that allowed them to take a picture. No need to explain to anybody how to use that. But what also pops up is your ability to share. So we're harnessing that behavior that we like to in museums, because it's a learning behavior, of the peer-to-peer learning. I saw this, look at it, I'm sharing it with you. When you get home, you get a little email that says, so glad you came to the MOMA today, here's what you saw. So this is your dashboard of activity at the museum. It tells you how many works you saw. Now, it knows what you saw because you were consulting the device. So if you walk around with the device in your pocket, you're going to get an email home that says you saw nothing. But so far we haven't had any complaints about that. And it talks about all the works of art that you consulted on your audio device. It can deliver back to you the audio if you want to hear it again. It tells you all the tours that you visited, and it shows you all your photos, as well as the items at the top that you stored, your favorites. What a great thing. Well, what a great memory to have from your museum experience. We've got a lot of positive reviews from this so far, and I cannot wait for the K through 12 teachers to figure out that this is a fantastic, forget about those worksheets in the galleries anymore. This is a fantastic tool for them to use and to bring back to the schoolroom and to build on that experience at home or in the classroom. I just want to say, because I'm so excited it's free now, that we made an app about 2 years ago, and again, we built our current audio device on this sort of app consciousness that sharing your work is a good idea, because part of what we built into this app, it was meant for families. There's sort of there's an art making tool, but it also gives you activities to do based on certain pictures. This is a cutout activity based on a Matisse work of art in our collection, and you kind of follow the scissors follow your finger as you drag it around to make the collage cutout, and then you can use that shape in your composition. So that's how that works. And we're always, everything that we do builds onto the next one, and that was a great experience. And now that it's free, of course, it's blowing up iTunes. It was only $3, but anyway, free is good. We like free. I also want to talk about how useful two-way communication systems are to building our ability to teach in multiple ways. What you see on the screen are 3 very bad screenshots of my colleague Carrie, who is speaking to the vertical stack of heads that you see on the screen on the left. They're using Google Hangout, and the interesting thing is that these are seniors who are unable to come to the museum. They're they're shut in their apartments, but they've been trained by the Senior Center, the Digital Senior Center of Queens, New York, to use Google Hangout. And that Senior Center programs us and many other cultural institutions in the area to lead virtual tours for the seniors, so they can have their conversations about modern art that they used to do all on their own when they were independently mobile. And now they can have them still with each other, that peer-to-peer learning, as well as the educator, the guide on the side, who facilitates the conversation. And we've been doing this for over a year with exactly as you see this. So I think it's an eye-opener on many levels, particularly the ability for seniors to adapt to new technologies. Speaking of old technologies, now I'm going to tell you what I really do at MOMA. What I really do at MOMA is I oversee online courses, and that has and going outside the box of MOMA and bringing educational experiences in that kind of format is actually an old story. Back in the 60s, we invited lots of network broadcasters who had studios right around MoMA's location, so it wasn't that big of a deal physically, but to come in and document what was going on in the museum and broadcast it out. MoMA was founded on a mission to help you and everyone else in the world understand the art of your time. That's a quote. And so TV was just a way to do that, but now we do it this way. So this is not all of the courses. We're up to 7 now, but over the last 3 years, we've been developing online courses. These are not, these are courses that you sign up for, you pay some money to, and they last for a certain amount of time, anywhere between 5 and 10 weeks. The content, as you see, is varied. Some of them feel very much like an undergraduate survey course, the history of modern art. Some of them feel like a studio art course, learning how to paint abstractly, learning how to make a collage, and others are more thematic that could fit into a number of different buckets, and that's a way that we're more interested in taking this direction of the courses so that we can reach more aspects of the collection and appeal to a wider range of interests. This is what the course shell looks like, pretty much the same for every other course. Completely a factor of the learning management system I use, which is plain vanilla. I don't have any complaints, but it's not fantastic. And on the left, you see that the modules are broken down. They kind of, one module is 1 week, basically. And students can enroll in 2 different ways. They can enroll as a self-guide, so they just get the information, the videos, the text, everything, but no interaction with the teachers or students. Or you can pay a little more and go instructor-led, where the instructors start the class at a certain time, the students introduce themselves to each other, and they continue on in a discussion that happens over the next weeks. The newest course that we developed, we just launched in October, is called Catalysts, and it's basically charts the history of sound, video, and performance art since 1960. And the picture you see down below is the artist Jean Tinguely, who's explaining to the film camera why he chose to blow up his sculpture seen behind him, called Homage to New York, in the garden of the MoMA the sculpture garden at MoMA. And this is just to sort of give it 1 little second advertisement for thinking about these courses as a way to collect really important information from all over the parts of the museum that would otherwise go unnoticed. So my hands are very, very dirty from digging into archives and to the media and performance art files and all sorts of corners of MoMA, because no one had written this history before, and there was very little documentation. The files were hard to manage, and I don't even want to tell you about the copyrights because we won't end on time. But I'm beginning to understand that making these online courses is really an act of publication, and that a lot of times what I'm most interested in doing are things that don't exist in any other format, but that is important information for visitors who, poor visitor who wants to come and see video art in our museum, it's almost like the lottery whether you're going to see anything or not, and it's never installed in any kind of historical perspective. So things like this can really bolster our ability to be good custodians of what we have, and also display works of art that feel very comfortable in a web space, to be honest, even though the artists, they were hard to convince that would be true, but I think I've converted them all now. So those courses that I just described to you, they're small in number and format, but even so, we've attracted probably over 4,000 enrollments by now from 61 countries all over. And I thought that was pretty good. I was feeling very good about global reach. And then I got a call from Coursera, and they said, you know, we'd really like you to join us in this effort to teach teachers all over the world. We want to be the source of professional development and offer all these courses for free. Do you have anything that would be relevant? And I was like, do I have anything? Of course I have something. We teach teachers all the time. And the other interesting thing about that particular group is they're so hard to get in a physical space. It's very hard to get them. You know, it's usually in summer, it's a workshop over 3 days, they pack it all in, and then we're limited by the spaces of the MOMA shell. I mean, we might reach, face-to-face, we might reach 150, 200 teachers in a real workshop environment. That's a good year. So when Coursera said, you know, we're gonna do this, be open to the world, we're like, absolutely, we're in. We created Art and Inquiry, 17,000 people enrolled. Later, 60% or 40% confessed that they weren't actually teachers, but they were interested in the content. And the content was pedagogical. It was, how do you teach art what's the best way to lead discussions in front of art using the inquiry process that I just described recently. Lisa Mazzola was the teacher, and we had a fabulous time with these thousands of teachers every day who would log in and talk about how important art was to their curriculum, what they were sharing resources at a tremendous clip. We had outcries from the students saying, please, please, please keep the course open longer because I haven't written down or captured all of the content that the teachers contributed into the course. Now, which is not to say that they didn't like our content, but it's to say that teachers all over the world, 110 countries all over the world, had things to say to each other. And they wanted to share that peer-to-peer learning, that urge to be social when we're learning. So we have some other experiments, and I'm going to show you just a little bit of this clip. Our next experiment, which hasn't ended yet, we're right in the middle of it, is we let the teens that have been taking our courses at MOMA for a long time into the studio and create their own course. And really, we really were facilitators. These are teens who'd been with us for a couple years taking courses at MOMA, so they were kind of savvy, but they really decided to have their own take on it.
Blow out the candle for me.
Oh, of course.
Happy birthday. I came to the party.
Oh, well, dinner's over.
Oh, yeah, I was at the factory with Nico and Debbie and a bunch of people.
Isn't that nice? So typical. Ridiculous.
I'm so tired of pictures like this on Facebook. Warhol and Nico, Warhol and me, Warhol and Eddie, Warhol, Warhol, Warhol. It's all selfies. He's like a crazy, fame-obsessed man, and all his work is about branding and materialism, just like him in real life.
Gift time. I got you something.
Oh, thank you. Oh, it's your work. How nice.
I didn't get you anything, but I'll see you later.
Here comes Diego. Okay. So that's just a plea from me to you to allow the students to have creative control and to be equal partners in the development of what the content could be, because I could have never in a million years come up with something so fantastic, and the students are never going to forget who those artists are, I assure you. I'm sort of running out of time, so I'm just going to go through the next slides a little quickly, but I want to point out to you that if you are interested in creating online course content, there's a blog post by me. It's called The 6 Thoughts on Teaching Art Online, and those are basically the 6 thoughts that you should think very widely about your topics and make sure you know who your audiences are when you're thinking about the topic, and especially the title. That don't just use a teacher I'm talking about in the front of the camera now. Don't just use a teacher because he or she is particularly knowledgeable in front of the camera, because sometimes they are not the best conveyors of information in front of a camera. And some of the best gallery instructors I know completely fall apart in front of the camera. So I highly advise you to do camera tests. Think about the treasures that your institutions have. You all have these stories. You all know these quirky things that are in your museum that you only know. Bring those out into the open. The audiences really, really appreciate that. Think about tasks that you can integrate into your online courses so that you can utilize that hands-on learning. Don't forget to triangulate in your courses in terms of thinking about people who maybe just watch the videos but don't participate in the discussions. Make sure that your content is spread and almost duplicated a little bit among all the different areas, because no one student is going to go through all of your content. And if you only conceive of it that way, it means that half your students aren't getting everything. And tracking your students' success. That's what I'm going to talk about that a little more. So that's my plea also, to think about creating these online courses in conjunction with what you do with social media. And we've found huge results and this was, I have to say, completely by accident. It wasn't planned, but now it makes me look very smart. That when we had the instructor-led courses, and let's say the students were in a studio course for 10 weeks, they were so excited about this amazing exchange of information, and they were posting up pictures from their studios and commenting on each other's works. They really created a very effective learning community. When the class was over, they're like, well, we don't want to stop. And so they said, well, let's make a Facebook group. And now this happens quite often. And of course, they like to include us in their Facebook group. And we're excited about that, because as a museum educator who never could follow any of my public who came to my lectures, now I get enormous insights into what the class effect has actually become. So this is 3 years after their course. They're still posting on a regular basis things that they've created in their studios. These are all amateur artists, by the way. They just do it for the love of it. And he posts this image. Ashok lives in India. He posts this image and tells everyone, as if we couldn't tell, that it was inspired by Francis Bacon. And so then you can see in the feed from top to bottom that the different artists are the fellow students are commenting on, oh, well, you know, this is so different from your last work, or, oh, I can really see where your inspiration is coming from. And then Mab, who posts a video on Francis Bacon that she found on YouTube, and then a show continuing the discussion. This happens every day in the forums, in one or another of the forums. And to me, this was an amazing, I don't even know what to call it, gift that I want to share with you and give you some confidence about that it could be successful for you too. We've also used Twitter. In fact, in Coursera, we use Twitter as a back channel. So a lot of times when people weren't understanding the content, or they wanted to ask the teacher a quick question, they would use our Twitter feed to do that. And it was a really effective way of getting the information out quickly to thousands of students who were there. It was also a way that the teachers ended up sharing a lot of resources with each other. And we storified the Twitter feeds after that and linked everyone to it so that it became, wasn't as ephemeral as Twitter tends to be. I just want to go back to this idea of global, and what you see in purple is a list of countries, sort of the top 60 countries that seem to send us a lot of students. I mean, that sounds a little weird, but students come from the top 60 countries, from the most popular, USA, to the least, which is Ukraine, but still sending us students, by the way. And I just wanted to point out with the big burst over there that New Zealand is somewhere near the top. So you might think that New Zealand is an unusual place for me to be, but actually there are Kiwis who like to take courses from MOMA.org, and I think that's important for you to know, because maybe they would also take courses from your institutions that are much closer by, and they would probably have better video service. So I just wanted to give you an overview. This is sort of what we talked about today, and it all makes sense in diagrams. That's what diagrams are for. But it is a large effort on the part of the education department and on the part of the museum overall. And I've heard this in other sessions, and thank you for saying it in all the other sessions, but I really do think this is a moment for partnership. We probably can't maintain the momentum. We probably can't maintain the very, very wonderful funding from Volkswagen of America forever. The Volkswagen, they came in 4 years ago and gave us 2 grants now that really helped us spark the energy. But really, we have to get to a sustainable place. And I think networking with you guys, understanding what's going on in the collection management space with the metadata and the kinds of synergy that's happening with creating crosswalks and databases, all of that conversation is relevant, and we want to be part of it because we can't invent it. We shouldn't invent it. What we should be doing is harvesting our content, which is right now as wild and woolly as you can imagine. Videos on thumb drives, rolled up papers in the corner. We have to spend a lot of time getting those golden nuggets out of the museum, and so we are ready, willing, and able to collaborate with universities, with NGOs, anyone who wants to help us get this information out there. So with that, I don't know, are we going to have questions, Matthew? Where are you? Yes. Okay. It's hard for me to see, so speak up if I'm not seeing you. All right, well, you sure? Okay. Right. I think those are what we can do now. The one thing I didn't really mention is that with the new course, we brought in badges. And how many of you know about digital badging? Okay, so, good number. Okay, so digital badging means that, in very top level description, that if you've completed a certain amount of content and you've demonstrated your knowledge of that content, you are eligible for a badge. And as a content developer, I have an agreement with, in this case, Credly, although there's others, CREDLY.com, that administer the badges as a kind of universal, I don't even know what the word is, organizer of these things. And at first I thought, I'm in a museum. Nobody comes to a museum to get a grade or to get a certificate. We already offered to teachers through the University of Alaska, we already offer them professional development credit. I didn't really think it was going to be a big deal, but because in that course, as part of their hands-on activity, they also build a WordPress site, and those digital badges appear on WordPress as they do on Facebook and LinkedIn. I thought, well, that's kind of nice, because you're going to spend 6 weeks building this WordPress site, and why not have a little badge on it? I mean, that's kind of just let's try it. And I didn't really think it was going to be that successful, in the sense that it wasn't going to be that motivating for the students, and was I wrong? And many of our alumni who have been taking courses all along, they weren't even interested in the topic, and they signed up because they wanted a badge from MOMA. And so now we're the last week of class. It looks like out of 30 students, I've got 20 badgers. Not the furry kind. But it just, I think that in terms of like, you know, providing, I mean, I don't care if it's hokey, like if that's gonna make people do all of the exercises that are suggested and finish their project in a good way, sign me up. So I think that we're gonna have badges for the rest of the courses too. Any other questions? Over there in the blue. And then the orange after.
Hi, Deborah. I just wondered if you see in the future a closer alignment with the universities in terms of education with your involvement with Coursera.
Thank you for asking that question. I would love to be more involved with universities, and as a matter of fact, on Friday, I'm off to the University of Otago to talk with the professors over there who are interested in collaborating. And then after that, I'm off to the University of Melbourne, which is a Coursera partner, and there's a professor there, Professor Horn, who's, I think, one of the first professors to teach art history classes. And before we even met, she since subsequently came to New York, but before we met, she had already figured out that what she wanted to do was film curators talking in the galleries, a different painting every week in her course called Sexing the Canvas. I know you're all gonna sign up for this one. I am, for sure. But anyway, it's gender studies and art history. So I think that, I mean, I haven't heard this conversation at this conference, so I'm just gonna share what I've heard in other academic conferences in the US, which is that it's a very controversial topic, and that professors feel very threatened by the fact that non-academic entities or other academic entities can enter a space that they hold sacrosanct. And of course that isn't my intention at all, but I think that what I have is a better textbook, right? So I've got all these, a richness of content. No professor would ever do the work that I did to put that history of performance, video, and sound art together. First of all, they wouldn't have the money to pay for the copyrights, but aside from everything else. But the fact that it's packaged as a course is kind of like a no-go for a lot of professors. Well, you know, we're not that interested in online courses. And I'm like, well, think of it as a textbook. You're licensing a textbook from me. I've got all these resources. You can use the weeks in whatever order you want. You can do, you know, you can be the teacher who's guiding through the resources. And I don't think we're just not there yet. But I think we'll get there soon. And I think that the University of Melbourne is doing really interesting things, and I hope that Otago University, something will come of that as well. One last question?
Just a question about your 20,000 students. That's some very impressive numbers. Did that grow organically, word of mouth? How do they find you? Do you advertise?
Right. So that 20,000 is cumulative over the last 3 years, just to be clear. And it includes the 17,000 from Coursera and the, you know, I guess it should be 21, but 4,000 that we have in our online courses that are fee-based, not free. So I did zero promotion for the Coursera, but I think that Coursera is such a large presence in this space that they bring a lot of that attention with them. And I think one of the interesting statistics, we had a lot of data from Coursera. Those of you who love big data, you're gonna love Coursera. They could tell me which videos were on for so many minutes by which students. It's quite amazing. But one of the things is that their community of students tend to take more Coursera courses. And 90% of the students who answered the survey before they took the class said they had never heard of MOMA before, but the fact that MOMA was a museum and making the course was of big interest to them. So for me, as a museum, that was a key indicator that this is a space I need to be in, especially since so many of them were very happy with the experience that they had. Now, for my now seemingly small number of students that come to my fee-based course, I have to admit to you, many of them have gone to the MOOC space now that MOOCs are going more into the humanities subjects, and I guess I kind of expected that. Some of them have come back, you know, because in online space it's very hard to tell what's a Cadillac and what's a, you know, a Ford. And I would like to believe that at MOMA we offer the Cadillac, although maybe better designed. But I'm also not saying necessarily that the Coursera experience is always a Ford, but what we can do in terms of interaction with the students is a much higher quality in the smaller courses. And I do struggle to get the word out. And so, to be perfectly honest, the part of the badging was interesting to me because it was appealing to the badge community, and the badge community was brought in. But, you know, email newsletters, buying ads and arts I mean, I don't know, it's kind of like spitting in the wind at this point. I'm not really sure what brings the students in other than the brand of the Museum of Modern Art. Are we okay? Thank you so much.